Well, hi. I'm really glad you're sitting in this Bible study now with one of our staff members here at LCM. And having gone through our last experience on Sunday morning, hopefully you understand the gravity of what's happening and where we're going. I'm not trying to tell you that this is going to be an easy time in discussing some of these issues. But even as you remember, I talked to you about a paradigm and a paradigm shift and some of the high points here at Lutheran Church of the Master, some of the low points. I mean, some of the things with pastors coming and going and transitions and the culture around us changing. But if we don't do something now, we're not going to get any better all on our own. So here's really what I need you to understand. I'm not trying to cause panic, because panic would be futile. It would just be chaos. And that's why we're doing this one small group at a time. And our attempt here is to give you the information and a place that you can talk openly. And we'll come back together as staff, and my staff will tell me what's happening and what your thoughts are. But where we can make some changes for the well-being of our church. And the last thing I need you to do is be defensive. No one's here saying that LCM is a bad church or that it's dead, because we do see life. But the truth is right here in the statistics, in the numbers. We don't look so good on numbers. So there's a number of other things that you're going to find out during the course of this time together that they're not going to be very appeasing. So let me give you some highlights as you talk about chapter 1 of the book, Autopsy of a Deceased Church. I highlight some things in my book, and as I do, they stand up in my mind. Like in the first paragraph, he says, she was very sick at the time, but she didn't want to admit it. There was only a glimmer of hope at best, but that hope could become a reality only with radical change. And as you've read this book, you find out, of course, he's talking about the church. And the church was very sick, and it was ailing, and it was dying. And he says, she was a church in the Midwest, a church that was probably born out of vision, a church that died because she no longer had a vision. And it's not as if we don't have a vision, but we haven't stayed true to what has gone on around this church. Back in the 1960s, this church was a flourishing place. In the 70s and the 80s and even the 90s, a very flourishing place. But then there was this transition, numerous transitions in this city that caused things to change. And I'm glad you stayed, and I'm glad you're here, but we didn't change with the culture around us. Now, I don't have page numbers on my iPad, but I'm a few pages ahead. He makes this statement. He says, autopsies are performed on humans to find out why they died. The discoveries might give surviving family members information they need to avoid the same path as their loved ones. And so we don't get to do an autopsy on our church now because we're not dead. But what he's trying to point out is when you find out what caused a person to die after doing an autopsy, that should give hope to the family. And they can start looking for things within their own lives. Well, the same is true for us. This guy has identified these 14 churches that were all dead, and he sat down and he's identified 11 symptoms. And now, as I looked through the 11 symptoms, I came to the conclusion we got like 8, 9 of them. 5, 6 would be like half, and that would be tragic to me. But I looked and said, man, we got like 8 or 9. Now that doesn't mean we're dead. And here again, I want to encourage you, we're not dead. Matter of fact, if you look at the numbers, and I've told you this, we started here, the high point, 1994, 95, 96, and we've done this over the last 20 years. But right now, we've done this. We've leveled off. Now, we're only going to be able to level off for a period of time. That's not going to last forever. And right now, we're in that refocusing, redeveloping stage. And if we don't do what needs to be done, we will continue to decline. But if we refocus and we redevelop, there is a possibility, it's not a for sure, but there's a possibility that we could start resurging. We could start picking up some power and some speed again. But that means that there's going to be some radical changes that need to take place. We're not going to be able to do things the way we've always done them, or we're not going to be able to do the old stuff that we've always done before, because it's not culturally relevant to the city and to this time and place. He says, I plan to take you through the results of 14 church autopsies. And he, at the very end of that page, he says, they followed paths that caused them to die. On the next page, he says, may God give us the courage to make the changes necessary to give new life to our churches. And that's my prayer for us, that we look and we make a decision together. I suppose I could make this as the senior pastor, but it does no good if I'm out leading the charge and no one is following me. It's not about you staying in the foxhole, me being out on the battlefield, and you telling me when to duck when the bullets start to fly. It's about all of us doing this together, working this out, coming to some tough realization, doing some hard analysis of who we are, what we're doing. He says in this prayerful commitment, the commitment is really between you and God. Perhaps God will raise up an army of church members who are no longer satisfied with business as usual. And the trauma of observing an autopsy is only beneficial if it is received as a warning to the living. The very last sentence he says there is, because if we heed the warnings of the autopsy, we stand to benefit far greater than we could otherwise ever imagine. Now, as you sit and you talk about this first chapter, would you talk openly and honestly? Would you share your heart, share your feelings, share your love, share your disgust, things that have hurt you in the past. Share the things that you see now. This is a safe place to do that, and I want to encourage you to do that. Otherwise, we're not going to move on any farther. We have to make some tough decisions, and we're going to ask you to help us make them. Have a good Bible study now.